Hello everyone, I'm Monlumi from Razikri Government High Secondary School. I'll be teaching you biology, specifically the zoology portion. And before we start the classes, I would advise you to download the textbooks if you don't have the textbooks from the NCERT website, which is freely available. And since you are in the 12th standard, I'll be talking about certain abbreviations and topics which you will be familiar since class 9, 10, and 11. So today we're going to start with evolution, which is in chapter 7. What do you mean by evolution? The first thing that comes to your mind when you talk about evolution is you think about dinosaurs, right? But basically, when you talk about evolution in regards to science, you're going to talk about proof that says that evolution did take place. So we're going to talk about one philosopher who named evolution, where he said that is a gradual and continuous change in nature. But when you talk about the scientific level, you're going to look towards Charles Darwin, who is a very famous scientist, who says that evolution is descent with modification. What do you mean by modification? Modification means a change, which is good for every living organisms. So at first, we're going to start with the origin of life, because we're going to focus on the universe, the solar system. Then from the solar system, you're going to focus on the Earth, and from the Earth, you're going to focus on the living organisms. So first of all, we're going to focus on origin of life. That is, the first one is the origin of the universe. Basically, you all know that around 20 billion years ago, there was a highly condensed red hot dust of clouds. They were called as the cosmic matter. These cosmic matter were fully composed with electrons, protons, and neutrons. That's the reason why when the electrons, protons, and neutrons reacted together, they formed the first element. What is the first element in the scientific table? That is hydrogen. That is the most important thing. When you talk about hydrogen atoms, it will only be H. But when you talk about a proper hydrogen, it will be H2. So at first, there was a cosmic matter that was formed. And as the cosmic matter started condensing together and becoming more and more hotter, it led to the theory and the process called the Big Bang Theory. Obviously, you have heard of Big Bang Theory, right? So in this process, what happened was that the highly condensed cosmic matter, they burst out. When they burst out, they started forming gases. Gases of clouds of cosmic matter. They were called nebula. Okay, they were called nebula in a way in which the gases, clouds of cosmic matter, along with the hydrogen elements, they form the clouds. Now we come to the second stage, that is origin of the solar system and the Earth. Basically, you know that origin of the solar system basically it originated around how much? 4.5 to 5 billion years ago. That's what it is written according to science. So the solar system also, what happened was that these nebula, these gases started condensing. Condensing means it started thickening, and at the middle portion, what happened was that the gases, the cosmic matter, came together due to thermonuclear reaction and formed the sun. Okay, so the central solar system was the sun. After that, there was layers of peripheral rings. These peripheral rings led to the formation of the planets. In the long run, it was in terms of millions of years back. So it took millions of years to form the planets, of which Earth is among one of them. So we're going to focus on the Earth. Why are we going to focus on the Earth? Because we're going to study about evolution that is happening inside the Earth. Okay. So the next one is the conditions of primitive Earth. You're going to talk about the conditions of primitive Earth. Long time back, around 4.5 to 5 billion years ago, the primitive Earth was called as a reducing atmosphere. Why was it called a reducing atmosphere? You know what is reducing, reduction, oxidation, right? So when you talk about reducing atmosphere, the most important thing is that you will know that oxygen is not found freely. That means you will not find oxygen in the atmosphere, the primitive atmosphere. When they observed the primitive atmosphere, they found that the primitive atmosphere of Earth was of very high temperature, around 5,000 to 6,000 degrees Celsius, which was very hot. That's the reason why the atoms, electrons, protons, and neutrons, which form the hydrogen elements, also formed other elements. But these elements, like in cases of examples like you have studied in class 9 and 10, like examples like methane. What is the molecular formula of methane? CH4. What is ammonia? NH3. What is water? H2O. Everything was found in the gaseous form, and water was found in superheated form. Why was it in superheated form? Because the primitive earth was highly volatile and very hot. Okay, so now when you talk about the primitive earth, you're going to talk next about the living organisms that is found in the primitive earth. So we're going to focus on how the living organisms started from abiotic to biotic. What do you mean by abiotic? Abiotic means those which are non-living. So where is the proof that living being originated from non-living being? That's what we're going to focus on when you come to the theory of evolution. There are various theories of evolution. The most important theory is theory of special creation. According to Christianity, every living being was created by God in a matter of 6 days, right? And the 7th day was a day of rest. But in case of Hindu mythology, you talk about Lord Brahma, who said that he took out various parts of his body and created a human being. So there are various theories of special creation. Now, when you talk about theories of special creations, some of the scientists, they reject it. Why? Because they say that there's no definite proof, which is a contradictory thing, so we cannot focus that too much on that. The second one is theory of abiogenesis. What do you mean by bio? Bio means living. What do you mean by Genesis? Means the first one, right? Like in the Bible, the Genesis. So theory of abiogenesis means non-living. So according to this theory was introduced by Aristotle. Okay? Aristotle introduced this theory in which he said that living being originated from non-living material, that is abiotic material. Like he said that the frogs and the toads, they came up from the mud. The maggots from flies, they originated from the meat. That's what he said. But there were two scientists who outrightly rejected the theory. That is Louis Pasteur and Francisco Redi. Okay, Louis Pasteur and Francisco Redi. These two scientists, they say that this is absolutely not possible. So they introduced a new theory called the theory of biogenesis. In this theory of biogenesis, what the scientists say is that living beings arise from pre-living beings. Okay, living being arise from pre-living beings means it has to be a living being in order to allow another living being to originate. So how did they prove it? They proved it by, these two scientists proved it. The first was Francisco Redi. He took a tumbler and then he boiled the meat and then put the meat in 2-3 tumblers. One tumbler, he exposed it, he did not close it. The second tumbler, he covered it with a muslin cloth, and then he kept it outside for a few days. What he observed was that after a few days, he found out that the cooked meat that was exposed without any covering had maggots living in it. Okay, and then the one which had muslin cloth, there was no maggots living in it. So what does it prove? The maggots that were living in it, actually the flies, they came inside the cooked meat and then they hatched their egg because of the rotten meat. But in case of the one with the muslin cloth, there was no maggots. So what does it prove? It proves that you need a pre-existing life, that is the fly, in order for another life to come out, that is the maggots. That's what he proved it. Okay. The next one was Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur is a very famous scientist. In cases of sciences and all, he's very famous. What he did was that he got hold of a flask, which is S-shaped flask. Okay, this S-shaped flask, what he did was that he put inside this hay. Okay, when you know what is hay, right? So he put inside this the hay, and what he did was that he started boiling it, the hay. So in order to, when you boil a certain liquids and all, after a certain temperature, the microbes will be killed, right? When you talk about microbes, they are those microscopic organisms. That means those which can be seen by the microscope only. So what he did was that he boiled the hay and formed into an infusion that is called hay infusion. After that, he kept this hay infusion for almost 18 months. After almost 18 months, he kept it just like that. What he found out was that there was no microbes for almost 18 months. So then he decided, okay, then let me cut this one so that there will be air going inside. Atmospheric air will go inside. When the atmospheric air goes inside, you know the air also they carry microbes. So what happened was that the microbes entered the hay infusion during that time only. Okay, which proved that if there is a non-living object or a non-living matter, a biotic matter, then it cannot possibly cannot give rise to a living matter, that is a biotic living matter. Okay. The next one is the theory of panspermia. The theory of panspermia is a very famous theory which says that they believe in extraterrestrial, living organisms and extraterrestrial living objects. Okay, so what this theory said was that in case of theory of panspermia, there was spores. Spores means like pollen grains. Okay, there was spores that was brought inside the Earth's atmosphere, that was brought inside the Earth's atmosphere by the meteorites. You know what are meteorites and no? Yes or no? So meteorites as well as comets, when they come inside and then they came inside to the Earth. Okay, that's how a living being was formed. That's what they said, which is absolutely not possible. Why? Because of intense heat and radiation, and so far it has not been proved. Till now, it has not been proved that life has been existing in other planets. There has not been proved. There has been lots of scientific experiments and things going on, but it has not been proved. So this theory was rejected outright. So among all these theories, the theory of biogenesis was mostly accepted, but then came along two scientists called Oparin and Haldane. Oparin and Haldane is a very prominent scientist which you must have studied in class 9 and 10. This Oparin and Haldane, what they said was that they focused mainly on the primitive Earth in order to explain how living being originated from non-living being. Okay, so we're going to focus on the charts. Okay, so Oparin and Haldane, they put forward a theory keeping into consideration the primitive Earth environment. What they said was that long time back, around 4.5 to 5 billion years ago, before the living being was formed, what they said was that there was intense UV radiation and the Earth's atmosphere was very hot. That's the reason why the temperature was around 4,000 to 5,000 degrees Celsius. In this case, the primitive Earth had lots of volcanic eruptions. Long time back, there was no living being, so there was lots of volcanic eruptions. When there is a volcanic eruption, obviously the temperature will increase, the atmospheric temperature will increase, right? So the atmospheric temperature started increasing. There was no ozone layer, so there was lots of UV radiations. When there was lots of UV radiations, there was another major thing called as the lightning. Long time back, there was lots of lightning that was happening. There was lots of intense lightning which came, and all these things contributed towards the evolution of the primitive Earth. Okay, so when Oparin and Haldane, what they observed was that the primitive Earth, due to its high temperature, it took billions of years to form into the present Earth. That is the present oxidizing atmosphere. When you talk about reduction, you have already heard what is reduction, right? So why I'm talking about oxidizing atmosphere, you're going to talk about oxidizing atmosphere because the present day Earth is composed of what? Free what? The present day Earth is composed of free O2 means oxygen. So we're going to talk about how the primitive Earth, because of the various factors, contributed to form abiotic cell to biotic cell. Abiotic means non-living, to biotic means living cell. That is the first primitive cell. Okay. So what are the various factors that contributed to it? The various factors that contributed to it was the sun, which gave out extreme UV radiations. There was no ozone. What is the formula of ozone? O3. And basically, you know that the primitive Earth did not have O2, that is oxygen, right? So there was no ozone. That means the UV radiation will come. Besides the UV radiation, the primitive Earth had lots of lightning. There was lots of lightning happening. And then there was the elements combination, like I told you about the previous one, where there is the NH3, that is ammonia, right? Then CH4, that is methane, and then there is H2O, that is water. Everything, every element, every compound existed in the gaseous form, okay? Besides the gaseous form, when you look at H2O, water, they found out that it existed in superheated steam. Okay, it was not in the form of normal water, but it existed in superheated steam. When it's very hot, you will know that when you start boiling water, they start forming steam. That's the reason why the temperature was 4,000 to 5,000 degrees Celsius, right? So if it's 4,000, 5,000 degrees Celsius or 5,000 to 6,000 degrees Celsius, then obviously the water will start boiling. So it will be in the form of superheated steam, okay? So according to Operin and Helen, what they said was that this ammonia, methane, superheated steam, along with all the factors, contributed into forming inorganic compounds to organic compounds. When you talk about inorganic, what do you mean by inorganic? Inorganic compounds are those compounds which do not have carbon and hydrogen. What is C? C is carbon. Obviously you know through chemistry. H is hydrogen. They do not have carbon and hydrogen bond. Okay. So basically a living being will have lots of organic compounds. When you talk about organic compounds, you will see carbon and hydrogen bonds. Remember that. C with this H, this is called a bond in chemistry. So what happened was that these inorganic compounds combined together due to the presence of lightning, UV radiations, and the various elements along with superheated steam and temperature to form the organic compounds. Okay, the organic compounds were the fatty acids, amino acids, and nitrogenous bases. What do you mean by nitrogenous bases? Those bases, you obviously you will know by the 11th standard, you will know what are bases. So nitrogenous bases are those which is composed of nitrogen. When you talk about fatty acids, you have studied in class 11, fatty acids combine together to form what? Lipids. Amino acids combine together to form what? Proteins. That means they are the simplest form of organic compounds. So this simplest form of organic compounds was formed from inorganic compounds due to the presence of all these factors. Okay? Since due to the presence of all these factors, they were formed into fatty acids, amino acids, and nitrogenous bases. These fatty acids, amino acids, and nitrogenous bases then went to the C type. Okay, primitive C. This primitive C was called prebiotic soup. Remember that. This primitive C was called prebiotic soup. Why was it necessary? It was necessary, I'll tell you later why it was necessary. After this, the simple organic compounds underwent condensation. You know through chemistry what is condensation? Polymerization, that means clumping together to form a higher compounds. So when they undergo condensation and polymerization, they combine together during polymerization to form fats. That is, fatty acids combine together to form fats. Amino acids combine together to form proteins. Nitrogenous bases, you know nitrogenous bases, they combine together to form nucleosides and nucleotides. What do you mean by nucleosides and nucleotides? The first thing that comes to your mind when you talk about nucleosides and nucleotides are what? The genetic material. That means basically the nature is forming the basic genetic material. Okay, so now they have been turned into organic macromolecules. Why are they called macro? Because they are the bigger form of molecules. Remember that, because they condense together and polymerize together. After they condense together and polymerize together, they will go to the depth. Okay, they will go to the base, the mud layer. Why is the mud layer of the sea important? The mud and the clay sediments of the prebiotic soup is very important because it enables the macromolecules to combine together, the elements to combine together to form different types of compounds. Remember that. So what happened is that in the mud and clay sediments, fats, proteins, nucleosides and nucleotides, they react together to form a colloidal aggregate, C-O-L-L-O-I-D-A-L, colloidal aggregates. Colloidal aggregates to form a colloidal aggregates. It is composed of organic molecules. It is composed of organic molecules. Basically, it is composed of proteins, fats, and nucleotides. So this is called aquaservates. This aquaservates was formed in which it is composed of colloidal aggregates in which the outer layer was covered with fatty membrane. That means the outer covering is a fatty lipids. Okay, remember that. So this aquaservates was like a form of a cell. Okay, this aquaservates was formed in which the aquaservates start collecting the amino acids and then the fatty acids and all. When they started collecting the amino acids and fatty acids, they started forming a spherical structure. Okay. Due to the formation of the spherical structure, the molecules were held closer and reaction started. When the molecules were held closer, as you know, basically most of the enzymes are made up of what? Basically, enzymes are made up of proteins, right? So, when the proteins combine together, they will form enzymes. In some cases, during evolution, it started forming enzymes. Basically, what is the main function of an enzyme? The main function of an enzyme is the breakdown, yes or no, of complex to simpler compounds, right? So that means it helps in cell division. Okay, besides this, it helps in formation of complex compounds called the protocells. These protocells comes under biogeny. Bio means living, geny means the beginning. Okay, so what happened was that these aquaservates, they started accumulating all the colloidal aggregates with the amino acids, fatty acids and all. And then during the course of evolution, it led to the formation of protocells. These protocells were believed to be from the aquaservates, to the protocells. These were believed to be the transition from abiotic to biotic. These protocells further changed, and it was believed that because of the protocells, it led to the first living cell. The first living cell. From the first living cell, they believe that it led to the origination of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. When you talk about prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, the first thing that should come to your mind is that you have talked about cells in class 9, 10, and 11, where you focus on prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are basically called primitive cells. Why? Because they do not have proper nuclear membrane. In case of eukaryotic cells, they are called the true cells. Why? Because they have got a proper nuclear membrane. What do you mean by nuclear membrane? A cell is composed of the outer layer called what? Plasma membrane. When you talk about the genetic material of a cell, it is composed basically in the middle part, right? The middle part called the nucleus. The nucleus is covered by a membrane, okay. This membrane is called the nuclear membrane. So what they said was that this prokaryotic cell is called a primitive cell. Why? Because they did not have the nuclear membrane. That means the present evolved cell is the eukaryotic cell. That comes under eukaryotes. Why? Because they have got a proper nuclear membrane. This theory was given by Oparin and Helden. They gave this theory. And then after they gave this theory, another scientists, that is Miller and Urey, they say that, oh, we completely support this theory. Why do they completely support this theory? They completely supported this theory by introducing a new form of experiment that is called the Miller and Urey apparatus experiment. In this case, the Miller and Urey, what they said was that we completely support this theory of biogenesis. Sorry, not this theory of biogenesis. This theory of Miller and Urey. Sorry, Oparin and Helden. So Miller and Urey, they made an apparatus making into an environment which is completely like the primitive atmosphere. They made an apparatus where they made a flask. In this case, they made a flask where this was the water, the boiling water. They were provided heat, and when water was boiled, obviously there will be steam, yes or no? So the steam will come and then it went towards this flask. In this flask, what happened was that they put electrodes. Electrodes basically is to provide negative and positive charges. That is the electric discharge. So they put the electrodes. Besides that, they put inside gaseous mixture. What do you mean by gaseous? That means those which are found in the form of gases. So the gaseous mixture were basically in the form of methane that is found in the primitive atmosphere, water, ammonia, and hydrogen. Okay, why do I put hydrogen? Because basically I told you in the previous first origin of the universe, where electrons, protons, and neutrons, they combine together to form the first element. What is the first element in the periodic table? The hydrogen, right? So that's the reason why hydrogen was also present. They put all together in a gaseous mixture and they started giving out electric discharges. Why do they give out electric discharges? So that it will take the form of lightning in the primitive atmosphere, okay? And why do you give out heat? You give out heat so that it will take the role of extreme 5,600 degrees Celsius temperature of the primitive Earth. So what they did was that after putting an electric discharge with the electrodes and the gaseous mixture, they started condensing. Condensing means they started cooling. Okay, they started cooling the steam. When they started cooling the steam, the water containing organic compounds. What do you mean by organic compounds? Those which have got carbon and hydrogen bond. Obviously, as you can see here, CH4 is methane. They have carbon and hydrogen bond, yes or no? So obviously now you know that there are organic compounds present here. So the organic compounds were collected after it was cooled down, and then it was tapped out, and then it was observed. What they observed was that it has to be observed immediately, okay? So what they observed was that there was colloidal aggregates. These colloidal aggregates were called quatervates. When they looked at the quatervates, these scientists looked at the quatervates, they found out lactic acid, alanine, aspartic acid. These are simple organic compounds. Basically, they are like amino acids. Amino acids are what? The building blocks of what? Proteins, okay? So what they found out was that you can get quatervates even in the laboratory lab. So they completely supported the Operin and Haldane theory of origin of life, okay? So we have talked about basically two topics in this class. In the next class, I'm going to talk about the evidence that evolution did take place. The most important thing is about fossils, right? So we're going to start with evidence in paleontology. Remember that, okay? So next class, I want you to download your textbook from NCERT website. You can easily get it. It's free. And then since I know that since you are in class 12 science, most of the high secondary science students are in the towns, so you can easily get through the net and all. So I want you to download the textbooks and read through it. I'm referring not only to NCERT textbook, but I'm referring to Veer Bala Rastogi and Modern ABC of Biology. These are the 3 textbooks that I'm referring to. So I would advise you to look through the NCERT textbook. And then that is all for today, and then I'll see you next class.